He's going to share on the third step and then just go with that wherever it takes him. This is a guy that I've known for a long, long time, but it took me over 30 years to really get to know him close, to really seek out personal knowledge of how he worked this program. I guess we kind of hurt ourselves as long as we can stand it. We together have participated in some service efforts, and I've gained a huge amount of respect for him. We've talked about recovery quite intimately, and I've gained a huge lot of respect for him. I've heard him share his story many times, and he has a very special way of sharing very important things like recovery from addiction with a group. And I'll give you one of my very best friends, Vito.
I'm an addict called Vito. Hi, family. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee and all those responsible for getting me to speak up here. It's always a privilege to serve Narcotics Anonymous in this way. I also want to thank the God of my understanding, because without that relationship, who knows where I would be. And I would also like to thank the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous, because without people like you in rooms like this, I wouldn't be here today. It's just that simple. I came in as a young man, barely turning 20, and I grew to be an old man in this fellowship. And that's a privilege, because I never thought I'd live to be 25. They asked me to talk on the third step and then let it go wherever it's going to go, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I have no idea where I'm going beyond the third step. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Why does that say as we understood Him and not as we understand Him? Most people in the fellowship don't really know or give a damn, but it's the most important part of that third step. You see, when that step was being written by the other fellowship at the beginning, it started off, God as we understand Him, and it caused all kinds of controversy. Because that particular fellowship grew out of a fellowship called Oxford Group, which is a religious-oriented group, and they brought the steps, the theory of the steps. There were 6 of them, and they were cut in half and made into 12 steps. And what happened is, when the step was written that way, that meant the fellowship had a God of its understanding, and that became a big problem. Because most of that fellowship was Christian-based, but at that time, Jewish people started to come in, Muslims started to come in, and Hindus. So they had to go back to group conscience, and they worked on it, and they came back with what they called the 10th stake. They changed the word to God as we understood Him, which meant when we walk into the rooms, it's not a God of the fellowship, but a God of your own individual understanding. And so that's why today we have the freedom to come in here and have a God how we understand, not the understanding of Narcotics Anonymous. And that's what makes that step work for people like us. We made a decision. What does that mean? Well, to me, a decision is not only a choice, but it's a commitment. And a lot of people will refer to the basic text and say, it's only a decision, because in the text it says it's only a decision. But if you go a couple sentences beyond that, it talks about a commitment once you make the decision. So if you don't make a commitment when you make that decision, you haven't really done anything. I just love to hear that story about the three frogs in the log. I think we've all heard that. And I get so angry when the old-timers come up to the newcomers and tell that story because I think it's a bunch of baloney. They'll come up and say there was three frogs on the log, two of them jumped in, which one's made the decision? The newcomer will always say the two that jumped in, the old-timer there with all of his infinite wisdom, will say, well, all of them, it's only a decision. Well, if it's only a decision, I feel sorry for that damn frog that didn't jump. He may starve on that log while the other two got away and found a meal. You see, because you make that commitment. You take the decision and then you commit to jump off the damn log. And that's what we do with the third step. We make that commitment to work it to the best of our ability so that we can learn to live it. Well, it says, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. What does that mean? What is our lives? That's what happens to us on a daily basis. That's our lives. We get up in the morning and we have this happen, this happen, this happen. That's our lives. What's our will? Well, if you're an addict, your will is your reaction to what happens in your life. Quite simple. Your girlfriend breaks up with you, boom, you go out and you use. You come out in the morning and your pickup truck is repoed, you go out and you use. No matter what happens, your boss fires you, you go out and use. It's called a reaction. And the whole purpose of the third step is when you take your will and your life and you turn it over to the care of God as you understood Him, is to take that pause and learn how to respond. As addicts, we don't know how to respond. We know how to react. And so when we take the time to really make that commitment, and take those feelings of what happens, our reaction to our will to what happens in our thing, and we learn to respond. You know, it's almost when you're like a kid, the big people would say, count to 10 before you open your mouth. And that's almost what it is about the respond and react. You take the time to respond. You go to a God of your understanding and you talk it through and then come back and respond rather than react. And that's really one of the biggest factors of the third step. There's no miracles involved with it. It's just simple spiritual principles that allows you to stop reacting and learn to respond. And therefore, if you have an obsession to use, instead of going and touching that first one and going into that wild compulsion, you take the time and turn those feelings over to God as you understood them, and then come back and respond. How do you respond? You think it through. And you don't have to pick up that first one. You think it through. It's easier to stay than have to get clean all over again. And that's the power of the steps. I've always been told the first 3 steps will keep you clean physically for a while. But if you're spiritually dirty and physically clean, you're in big trouble. And we see it all the time. So, we have to work spiritual principles in our lives. And I don't know where I'm going with this because I can't talk for an hour on the third step. But what it's going to do, it's going to introduce me into spiritual principles. Are you spiritually clean? That is the key. That's why when they talk about 4 through 9, that you become clean spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And that's the process of what we do on a daily basis. Are you really living a program? In the chapter, What Can I Do? It talks about talking the steps over with our sponsors and working the steps, waiting for the spiritual awakening of living the steps in our life. Now, are we still talking about steps? Are we still working steps? Or if we've been here for a while, are we living the steps in our life? If you're involved in your program, which means you would be involved in a home group and have a home group, because I hope there's not too many orphans around, or too many people that are insecure and want to get adopted and have 10 home groups. There's still some of those people around. But if you have a home group and you're spiritually clean, you get involved. You get involved in group conscience. You don't look at your watch and say, let's see, so-and-so's coming on TV. Let's get this fast. Let's get this fast. GSR, you know how we think, vote for us. If you're doing that, you're spiritual dirty. You're not living a program of recovery in your life. You see, part of recovery is responsibility. And responsibility means you are responsible for your personal program, and you are responsible for the fellowship where you receive your recovery. You know, there's no people up there running this fellowship. It's people right here in this room who are responsible to allow this fellowship to function in the way it's supposed to. If you're not willing to take the time to get involved in your own recovery and get involved in the fellowship that gives you recovery, you may wake up someday, like Rip Van Winkle did after he fell asleep, and found out your fellowship is not the fellowship that you knew. It's no longer a fellowship where you can go to your home group. Somebody said to me, it's getting to a point where they're going to wake up in the morning and when you come into recovery, they're going to assign a home group to you. And I mean, that sounds so far-fetched, but it's around the corner. I hear if this new service structure goes through, they'll even tell you the geographic boundaries of your area. And your regions will be sucked into one. If you have 4 regions in the state, all of a sudden you'll have one state assembly and everything is gone. Well, if we can't sit in area service with 15 groups now, how are we going to go into a new type of geographical area service with 50 groups? Think about it for a minute. If we think it's tough enough now to stay for group conscience at a group, and tough enough to show up at area now, what are you going to do if you wind up with 60, 70, 100 groups at area within the geographic boundary set by somebody else? Guess what? You won't want to make decisions. And I think really that's what it's all about. That's about so you don't want to make decisions so somebody else makes it for you. And I believe that we have to now get involved in our program, not reinvent the program, but revive the program. Because what has happened is the program has fallen asleep because we have become lazy and we allowed it to go to sleep. Thank you. So what I'm basically trying to say is if you're working a third step, and you're committed to your spiritual way of life, you need to get involved in all aspects of your program. And that's not only in your personal program, living steps in your life, learning to sponsor people, having a sponsor, but getting involved in the greater program. Because when the program's gone, I don't know about you folks, but I am alive today, and I'm in this room today because Narcotics Anonymous was there to be my eyes and ears. Narcotics Anonymous was there to call me when I violated spiritual principles. Narcotics Anonymous was there to tell me when my ego was running wild. Narcotics Anonymous was there to tell me when I was out of control and I was manipulating everything for my own benefit. Does that happen today? I don't see it. I see guys 13-stepping girls continuously and nobody's saying a word. People with 20, 25, 30 years are taking somebody coming out of detox and 13-stepping them. And everybody says, well, it's none of my business. Well, if it doesn't become your business, you're going to lose the fellowship that you have. You know, complacency is alive and well throughout the whole fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous today. And I am not anti-world. Don't get me wrong. I am not anti-world. I'm pro-Narcotics Anonymous. I'm about reviving that spirit of open participation when the basic text was written. And yet I hear people say some of those dinosaurs in Narcotics Anonymous need to go. There's a new wave of thought going through this fellowship. But yet, when people came in and they were allowed to write addicts for addicts when they had 30 days clean, they stayed clean. They became involved. There's many people around today that came in and were allowed into that process and they became clean. And wrote literature and were excited about this fellowship because you know why? It was about you. It was when the traditions meant something. You know, if you're living steps in your program, you only got half a program, unless you have the traditions in the other half of the program. It's 24 spiritual principles. And the steps were written for the groups to participate through the service structure. And yet when somebody says it's only for the groups and it doesn't go beyond that, what does the 9 tradition say? I mean, I'm a dope fiend, don't dope fiend me. It talks about how we have responsibility, that the NA service structure is responsible to each level. You know, NA as such can never be organized, but we can create service boards or committees. Now that tells me the traditions go beyond the group. It's in black and white. NA as such may never be organized, but we may create service boards responsible to those they serve. And what does that mean? It means the addict is the most important person, you. And the first committee that you create is called the steering committee, the group steering committee. That's a GSR, an alternate, and treasurer, and secretary. That is the first committee. And a bunch of those steering committees get together and they form, and first of all, that steering committee is responsible to the addicts in that group. And then those steering committees get together, 5, 6, 10, 15 of them, and they create what is known as an area. And those areas are responsible to those groups, and those groups to the individual. And then the areas get together and form what we call regions today. But the region is responsible to its area members, the area members to the groups, and the groups to the individual addict. Well, I don't know, I might be suffering from dementia or getting a little senile, but it doesn't seem to work that way anymore. You know, when we look at the concepts and you put them alongside the traditions, something doesn't quite add up because you've got one set of principles. And by the way, if you think concepts are spiritual principles, you're totally wrong. They're service principles. Let's call a spade a spade. Concepts are service principles. They are not spiritual principles. They are not like the steps and the traditions. But we were told they were going to be adapted from the other fellowship who had concepts for a long time and they worked. But that didn't happen. Because if you take the other fellowship's concepts and put them alongside our concepts, their concepts complement the traditions and ours violate them. They were rewritten from scratch. They were never adapted. So all of a sudden we have 12 traditions that are for our groups in service and to create the service structure, and we have another set of not spiritual principles but service principles that are in direct conflict. And it seems to me that somewhere in the text it says spiritual principles are never in conflict. If it's not spiritual, it's not practical. But yet we're working with things that are not practical today. I don't know. Let's see. The wheel was invented way back, long before I was born. And although it's made of different material, it still spins around and gets transportation going. So what the hell are we trying to reinvent the wheel for? When Narcotics Anonymous came to be, the modern Narcotics Anonymous, with the service structure and the tree when it came out, when Greg wrote the tree, we started on this journey of serving the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous by the service structure of the 9th tradition. And somehow we lost that. You're at a very critical time in your own personal recovery. The month of July, or April, World Service Conference is coming into effect. And there are a few motions in the car. And a few of those motions have already been transpired into the cap to be brought on the floor that will take your service structure away from the way that you've known it. Regions will no longer be as you know. Take a state like Pennsylvania, which is just a few miles from here. They have 4 regions in the state. There'll be 1 assembly. Do you really think that's going to work? I live in Florida. We have 3 regions in the state of Florida. And it takes from the Keys up to Pensacola about 15 hours of driving. Do you think if something is held in Key West that people from Pensacola or Tallahassee or Jacksonville or Tampa will drive there? Or people from the Keys or Miami will drive to Pensacola? It's not practical. It's not practical, it's not spiritual. If that happens, you will be in a fellowship that will have a corporate structure where at the top you'll be told what your group conscience is. Your regions will no longer serve areas because it will be impractical. Your areas will no longer serve groups because it will be impractical. And how can groups serve individual addicts if they can't be serviced themselves? And I think we need to look at our spiritual principles in a deeper sense now. What are we doing? Are we sitting here watching our fellowship decay from in front of our eyes? It was like a strong Roman Empire that was going to last 1,000 years, and it crumbled because the principles upon which it was founded disappeared. That can happen in a country, that can happen in an organization, it can happen in a fellowship. Because right now, the biggest disease in Narcotics Anonymous is not the disease of addiction, it's the disease of apathy. Let somebody else take care of it. Let somebody else decide what's going to happen. Oh, the addicts don't care. Let somebody else make the decision. I don't think any addict in the Fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous is any different than me. They care about their own personal recovery if somebody explains what it's all about. People are in this fellowship today, they do not know what the traditions are. They do not know what the steps are. Today, people pick up the flat book, and I'm talking about the working guide for how it works and why, and they tell me, I've had addicts going, well, we don't need sponsors. We got this book. It's a home study program. The disease of addiction is a home study program now. Unbelievable. And it sounds like a joke, but I see it every day. I see people around now with 5, 6, 7, 8 years. They have no sponsor. And they'll tell you, what do I need a sponsor for? I got the book. The book tells me how to live the steps. I don't think I'm any dumber than anybody else in this fellowship or any smarter. But I needed somebody that had the experience to tell me what to do. Who lived it and felt it and could understand my feelings and my pain. But then again, there are many people in this fellowship that don't feel pain. Because we're dealing with DRT. And if you don't know what DRT is, it's called drug replacement therapy. Let me tell you about the history of DRT if you really want to get your eyes wide open. The first DRT drug in the United States was called heroin. It was administered to veterans that came back from the First World War. And they developed heroin to take addicts off of opiates, primarily morphine and laudanum, and they gave prescriptions out for heroin. And after 2 years of giving prescriptions out for heroin, there was an epidemic going around. And they had to outlaw heroin in the United States after they prescribed it for 2 years. Because that was drug replacement therapy. They replaced heroin to replace morphine. And then in about 1964, they came up with a new drug replacement therapy called methadone. This is the miracle drug. We had this epidemic of heroin now for the last 40 years. We'll come out with methadone, and that will cure the problem. Well, here it is 50-some years later. People are still dying of methadone. Their bones cracking when they get to be old people like me because they've been on methadone for decades. They come out with a new drug replacement therapy called Suboxone. But you see, you don't have to line up in line. You can go to the doctor and he could just give you a prescription for it. And he could tell you, take this, you're clean. And we see people walking around the rooms like doing a Thorazine shuffle, chairing meetings and saying they're clean. Now, I am either suffering from dementia, going a little mentally crazy, but to me, clean is total abstinence from all mood and mind-altering substances. Now, I'm not talking about... I understand there is medical conditions where it's between you, God, and your doctor. And I'm not talking about medical conditions. I'm talking about drug replacement therapy. But yet we have a fellowship today that does not want to take a stand. They won't say it's wrong and they won't say it's right. They want to appease the recovery system out there. But you know why that's happening? Because people in the rooms won't stand up and say, we want a commitment to say that Suboxone is not being clean. And it's not going to happen unless you say that's what you want. It's not going to happen unless you say you want a fellowship where it's total abstinence from all mood and mind-altering drugs. That's what I mean. There's a disease called apathy. Well, I don't want to get involved. Oh, I don't like controversy. Oh, I can't handle that stuff. Well, if you can't handle that stuff, you're going to find yourself on the outside looking in very soon. And those people who have the courage to stand up oftentimes are ostracated in the rooms. You can ostracize me. I don't really care. I'm too old. I don't care. I've had many years of being told that I was wrong, I'm this and that. So I don't really care. But I do care about the people who are younger than me to have a place to come for recovery from the disease of addiction. Or Narcotics Anonymous may wind up destroying itself from the inside out. And that's very scary. And if you don't think it's going to happen, open your eyes to what's going on right in front of you in the rooms that you go to. Just like you got to take a stand on an old-timer 13-step in, you got to take a stand on people using Suboxone. They're welcome in Narcotics Anonymous. You're a member when you say you are. You could come in and be a member. You could be using heroin and be a member of this fellowship. But what you can't do is serve the fellowship. And there's a difference. And that means if you're using heroin, you can come to meetings all you want. But you can't chair a meeting or be a speaker. If you're on Suboxone, you're welcome here. Keep coming back till you get what we have. But you're not going to chair meetings or serve the fellowship. I remember the day, and there's many people in here that can remember the day when people were on methadone and they just couldn't wait till they got their dose cut down to the left so they could come in and say, I'm clean. And I've watched people come here for a year, 2 years, getting their dose cut down until they finally could come in and say, I'm clean. And that's because we stood up and said, if you're on methadone, you're not clean. We'll love you until you get clean. Keep coming back. Talk to your counselors. Get your dose coming down. Today, how many people got enough courage to go up to somebody on Suboxone and say, you're not clean? You're welcome here. We love you. Keep talking to your doctors and get your dose cut down. It's so scary that last month I made 2 12-step calls in Miami of people on the street dying from Suboxone. It's sold at $35 a dose on the street in Miami. You don't go on the street to buy something if it's not mood or mind altering. Ask anybody on Suboxone to stay off it for 3 days. They'll tell you they can't. What does that tell you? We're at a crossroads in recovery today. Usually I speak at a lot of conventions, and that's a celebration of recovery. This is a 12-step retreat. And so I can be as honest as I can here at a retreat because it's about steps and it's about spirituality. And that's why I'm talking about these things. Because these things are very dear to me. And they should be very dear to you too. You need to talk about getting back to the basics. And what are the basics? Beginning to write literature, addicts for addicts. We don't have the World Literature Committee, but why can't your areas and your groups have writing again? And write literature and get together and have your areas do it and send it up the line, whether we have a literature committee or not. Show them that we want to write for ourselves. There is so much talent in this fellowship. Just begin to write. Your home group can start writing. You only have to write 1 page at a time. Do a page a month. You got 12 pages at the end of the year. It may take 10 years to get a book, but you can do it. Start the process again. Do the thing, the excitement of addicts, writing for addicts. If you didn't experience it, and you didn't see it, and you didn't see the passion involved, try it. Get together, form a committee. There is nothing that says you can't form a local literature committee and start writing again. And you know what? Because of our disease and the passion and the way we get addicted, you'll get hooked on writing. You can't wait to go back and write some more. Because you have the disease within you, and you have the solution to that disease, and you know what the answers are. No professional writer can write what you feel inside you. If you look at the early literature, before it was taken out, there was a phrase in there that is close to me to this day. It said, Narcotics Anonymous doesn't make sick people well. It brings dead people back to life. Every addict in the world knows what that means. Because we were spiritually dead. And we came in here and we were brought back to life. You can find some of that in the grade book. You can find some of that in the second edition. How powerful is it that Narcotics Anonymous doesn't make sick people well? It brings dead people back to life. There isn't an addict in this world that does not understand and feel that phrase. You know why? Because it was written by an addict for an addict. It's like in the days when we used to do 12-step calls. Anybody here remember 12-step calls? And you come in and you hug the guy and say, I know what you're feeling. I've been there. I know what you're feeling. You don't have to say a word. We know. Follow me. It can get better for you. And people will cry and hold on to you because they never heard things like that before. What 12-step work do we have now? We'll go into a jail or a rehab and talk. But how many people are out in the streets making 12-step calls? Most areas today don't even have a 12-step committee that are signed up to do 12-step calls for the month. What a waste. Because we depend on the recovery community out there to do our 12-step work for us. Part of their 12-step work is, well, here's a prescription for Suboxone. Take this and you'll be clean and live a normal life. Well, if you're an addict like me, you'll gladly grab that prescription when you first get out of rehab. You're giving me something to take the pain away. And I'm not talking about physical pain. I'm talking about the emotional pain that every addict experiences. I can remember the days that we would go out there in the trenches and talk to people that were hurt. People that had guns to their head. They're barricaded in the house. The SWAT team couldn't get in there. The teams of 2 addicts crossed those police lines, walked in those houses, and brought the addict out in tears and got him in rehab. What can SWAT do? Kill him? But we forgot how to do 12-step calls. The very basic things of this fellowship. We don't do it anymore. How many people have been on a 12-step call the last 2 months? 4 hands out of this, 5 hands out of this whole room. We used to live with these 12-step calls. That's how we duplicate ourselves. Do you know that the fellowship in the United States over the last decade has been shrinking in meetings? Even though Narcotics Anonymous is growing worldwide, in the United States we're losing meetings, going backwards. Why? We have all this literature that we've had professional writers write. We have public, now no longer public information. I believe it's public relations now. And yet we're losing meetings in the United States. I never thought I would see the day when the years go by that Narcotics Anonymous shrinks in the United States. So what does that mean? It's growing worldwide, but it's not growing in the United States. Because maybe we need to get back to basics. Maybe we need to revive group conscience. Maybe we need to have a place to bring group conscience. Because I think only 4 motions out of group conscience from the regions have landed at the World Service Conference in the last 5 or 6 years. And as of 2014, there will no longer be any motions accepted by regions at the World Service Conference. What does that mean? That means you no longer have a say on how this fellowship goes. You know, we used to be so proud to say that an addict in a home group could make a motion. He could go to area, pass an area, go to the region, pass a region, and be delivered on the floor of the World Service Conference. How can we say that after 2014 they will not accept regional motions on the floor? We have a conference and our regional delegates only have so many minutes to talk on the floor of the World Service Conference, but World Board members can talk as long as they want on the same issue. That doesn't seem quite right to me. That somebody elected by themselves because the World Board elects their own successors, not done through the fellowship, has as much say, talk longer than somebody represented by you. You may not have known that, but you don't know it because of apathy. You need to get back involved in the program that is your lifesaver. We used to have conventions. A lot of times the themes of the convention would show a lifesaver from a boat. And that's what Narcotics Anonymous represented. But unless we get back to the basics of writing literature for addicts, by addicts, and start writing your home groups, get back into group conscience, demand that we have group conscience, and if they're not going to accept group conscience at the World Service Conference, then build a place to have that conscience taken. Start a new type of service conference. Don't leave Narcotics Anonymous. Don't start another fellowship. Don't go to another fellowship. But find a place to take group conscience and take care of the United States in the United States. Sure, they need to get clean in Iran, but it's a dictatorship. And it's run by the government. The literature is by the government. And if that's how it works there and addicts can get clean there, that is great for Iran, but I live in the United States. And if the fellowship can only function in China under ruling of the government and addicts can get clean that way, that's great for China. But I live in the United States. And I need a place in the United States where my conscience is heard. And I can be, because I don't live in a dictatorship. I live in a democracy, a republic democracy. And that means I have the right to voice my own opinion in all affairs of my life, including recovery. And if I'm not allowed to have group conscience, that means I have no say in my recovery. And I need to wake up. I need to wake up. It's almost like the founding fathers of this country when they were no longer heard by Great Britain. And they just wanted to be taxed and they wanted their money. Somebody said, give me liberty or give me death. And I say for this fellowship, give me liberty. Let me have group conscience. Let me have a say in how the fellowship I get clean and operates. I'm not against the world. I'm not against the World Service Office. I'm not against NAWS. I'm pro Narcotics Anonymous. It's not us or them. It's us. But there is no us. You know, in the 12th tradition, it talks, it says, without the we, there is no me. Well, that goes broader. Without the we, there is no me. We as a fellowship. Without us, there is nothing. But if you want to give up your right to be a fellowship by allowing somebody to determine what your group conscience is and what you think, you do have that right. I'm not telling you you don't have the right. If you want to give up your group conscience, you have that right. I don't want to give up my group conscience, and I think most people here today want to say in their group conscience. So be proactive. Start literature committees in your group and start writing Addicts for Addicts. It will spread. You will see a spark. People will begin to stay. Your group will grow. And you'll have a say over your recovery. I can go on and on and on, but at this point I feel I've taken you hostage. So I'm going to surrender and shut my mouth. If you got anything out of it, good. Take what you want. Leave the rest. I don't have all the answers. I just shared what I felt from my experience, strength, and hope. Thank you all, and I love you.